Richard, this is always such a treat. It's so good to see you, and it's been a while. So good to jump in, and we're going to tackle a conversation that, frankly, I don't think is tackled enough. And in fact, that's kind of the point. And it's how to have uncomfortable conversations. I think a lot of times, you and I were talking before we jumped on about how managers, leaders, sales managers, a lot of times we avoid these uncomfortable conversations because let's face it, they're not fun. There's a lot of angst that might go into the situation, and we never know how somebody's going to handle it. So I'd love to get your thoughts. How should we as leaders be thinking about and planning for and preparing for having uncomfortable conversations with our team members?
Well, Carson, it's always good to have conversations with you. And I think I read a stat. I don't know where it came, probably Forbes or Harvard, I'm sure, but 70% of managers deal with difficult conversations by avoiding them. Now imagine that if 70% of managers somewhere in the world are avoiding conversations, and we as the associates, employees, are wanting to move forward in our career, wanting to have conversations with our direct supervisors and wanting to get better.
Yeah.
And they're avoiding those conversations. And it just makes no sense that we just need to move toward. I think that's the first step, is moving toward that conversation that you need to have, whether it's in business or your personal life. I think that's, you got to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, I'm going to move toward this conversation and set a date to have this conversation and make sure that it gets on the books. That's the first step for me.
I think one key element too is making sure that these conversations shouldn't be a surprise typically to the folks that we're meeting with. And I think that was something that was instilled in me very early on in my leadership career, is that, when you have a challenging or an uncomfortable conversation with someone on your team, it shouldn't come as a surprise. As a leader, even today, I'll keep a OneNote file that's open for every one of my team members. And I'll document, where we've been, where we are, where we're going. And a lot of that's really positive. I keep factoids about the person and, what matters to them, what makes them tick, what the names of their cats are, what their spouse's name is, also what they want to do in their career. Because here's the thing, Richard, when I'm meeting with someone on my team, whether it's a great, glorious, recognition filled conversation or it's a uncomfortable conversation, I'm going back to their words. You've expressed to me that this is the trajectory you want to be on. You want a raise. You want a promotion. You want a new role. The path that we're on is making it very challenging for me to make a recommendation for that. And we document that these conversations are being had. Now, look, I think to your point, we've got to make sure that preparation is key. We've got to make sure that we keep it very focused on facts. It's not about emotion. Hey, I felt like this when you said this.
Yeah.
No, that's not what it's about. And I've gone so far as to make recommendations to people about books they could read, or talking to them about, you don't need to make a drastic overhaul of how you do this. You need to add some finesse to this. Talking to them about, especially when they have challenges with their colleagues, how can we win friends and influence people, as an example? How can we add some finesse to your approach? How could we tweak it in a way that is going to make everybody feel good, feel included? A lot of times it's not a drastic overhaul of their performance that you're looking for. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's, let's just add some finesse and let's make sure everybody feels good instead of you coming in like a bull in a china shop.
And it goes back to, and we've had this conversation about the why, making sure that you know the why behind the conversation. There's a lot of bad reasons or terrible reasons to have a hard conversation. You as the manager, to beat your chest and to be right, or to look good for your bosses, or to win, or to, God forbid, punish or blame. And you mentioned this, the good reasons to maybe learn a little bit more what's going on. That whole iceberg metaphor that we've all been taught. There may be some things happening underneath the surface that you have no idea that could be happening in their life. Like last year for me, having some really physical things happening with my back that really a lot of people didn't even know about. Or here's another good reason: finding some truth or strengthening that relationship, and of course, changing the behavior. But I think if we could maybe reframe the whole conversation from being an uncomfortable conversation, if you change it in your mind, if I go to my youngest daughter who's 21 and think in my mind, I'm going to have an uncomfortable conversation with her. What if I reframe that to, I'm going to have a learning conversation with her? Then all of a sudden, my heart changes, Carson. My frame of mind changes. And I try to do that same thing with the people that report to me or the people I report to. Maybe I need to approach it not as uncomfortable, but more as a learning conversation. And it just changes the emotion. You mentioned emotion. It changes that.
It does. And I think a lot of times, Richard, to your earlier point, managers will avoid these conversations or these situations as much as humanly possible because of the angst and the worry and the emotion that they feel. It's not even about the person. And let's just dive right into the deep into the pool. I don't like firing people, but I've fired a lot of people in my time, and I've fired people that that I really respected as people. It was a performance-based, results-based business. It was challenging, but I was thinking about my challenge, right? I wasn't necessarily, and don't get me wrong, I was absolutely thinking about how are they going to react and respond? Are they going to find something that, quickly and things like that? I mean, you're thinking about all those things, but I'm also thinking about like my own challenge. Like, my gosh, I really don't want to do this. It makes me feel yuck. But here's the thing. I look back on my own career and losing jobs, even outside of my own control, were blessings. Didn't feel like that at the time, but they were blessings. And if you as a manager, if you give somebody, talk about framing things up, if you give somebody the opportunity to find something that is their true calling, which clearly this job is not, aren't you actually serving them in the grand scheme of things? And I think that's the mindset that you want to come into this meeting with. It's, look, you stick with the facts. This is a performance and results-based business, as you know. Unfortunately, we have to end your employment here, but I want to reaffirm my support. If there are things that I can do, we find something together that I can write a glowing letter of recommendation to somebody. I can speak to your acumen, your work ethic. This isn't for lack of trying. And I genuinely have a vested interest in seeing you succeed. That's a way to frame a challenging, uncomfortable conversation in a positive way that, frankly, yeah, it's going to hurt them, but you're going to be there to help them if you want to be. Now, some of these, granted, I've been in situations where I've fired people and they threw their badge or they got up and started to yell. And I think the key element is also stay very calm. Again, stick with the facts, because this isn't, you're paid to be a steward of your organization and an ambassador of your business. So at the end of the day, your organization is paying you to have that uncomfortable conversation, and you got to do your job. That's really what it comes down to. So finding the best way to do it in a way that is respectful to the organization that you work for, also respectful for the person that you're meeting with, even if it's a disciplinary situation, a big mistake that they made, whatever it is, maintain composure, be respectful, do your job.
Yeah, and I've had those same situations, Carson, where somebody has come back to me after a separation, and they have said, "You know what? Thank you, because I am in a position now where I am fulfilled, happy, and I am doing what I should be doing." And I'm so glad that we had that uncomfortable conversation and we separated. And keeping the emotions separate out of the conversation, it's so difficult to do because our brains we either work on analytics and facts or we work on emotions. And it's hard to have both in our brains at the same time. Matter of fact, it's next to impossible. So making sure that the emotions are held at bay while the facts and the data and knowing your unconscious bias, maybe some of their tendencies, maybe some of their triggers, and having all of that lined up, and maybe even practicing the conversation before you even have the conversation, the meeting before the meeting, and so that way all of it flows in such a way that it's not uncomfortable for either party. That, for me, that's how you avoid those uncomfortable conversations.
No doubt about it. And look, I think that a lot of times, many times, people that are about to have a uncomfortable conversation from and with their leader, they probably know that there's something amiss. They may know, they may have an inkling of what is about to be covered. But even when it's not, there are times, and the other thing I would say, kind of as we wrap up, is there are a lot of times where, you mentioned that 70% stat. People will put off even the conversations of like the day-to-day stuff. Being on a call and I witnessed a behavior by someone on my team where maybe they got defensive or they were, very maybe combative with a colleague or whatever it is. There's a lot of times, and as leaders, we get pulled in a lot of different directions.
Whew.
Act in the moment. I think it's important to maybe debrief after a call. Send them a message and say, "Hey, can we chat for a moment?" And it doesn't have to be a, "Hey, I witnessed this," or, "Hey, you did this," because that's going to
Right.
start them off on the defensive. It's, "Hey, walk me through how you think that conversation went. Talk to me about the, kind of the interaction with your colleague a little bit." You don't have to say a word that, to your point, is going to be a trigger word. You can walk them down a path where they can open up and they can start to say, "Yeah, you know what? They've been getting on my nerves because of XYZ." Or, "Yeah, we got an issue because of XYZ." And then that helps you as the leader to be able to come in and you defuse this uncomfortable conversation because now you're their advocate and you can talk to them about, "Hey, look, I completely understand. And if there's something that I can do to help support this situation, I'm all in to do that. However, be careful because in situations like that, you're on a call with multiple of your colleagues and peers. And
Oof.
out of context, it could appear that you were maybe coming out of left field. Maybe you were
Right.
coming at and approaching in a way that you wouldn't want to be perceived as. I just wanted to throw that out there to you. What are your thoughts?" And there are ways to be very respectful without turning the conversation immediately into an uncomfortable one. Now, granted, there are also times where you've got to go farther into the deep end and you've got to call out a very specific, I've had situations where I've said, "Look, you
Yeah.
said these words,
Yeah.
help me out here." And, "Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. We can't do that. And I'm going to need to document that we had this conversation because that's not a statement that we're going to be able to support going forward. I have to report this. I've got to, whatever it is. There are times where, and you're going to know these things. And when in doubt, talk to your leadership. The beauty is a lot of us, we have our own managers as
Yeah.
leaders. I am always looking for guidance. I don't ever
Oh
purport
man.
to be the end all be all when it comes to leadership. And there's a pretty good chance that your boss has been through an experience that's very similar to what you're about to articulate. I've had so many times where I've gone to my leaders and have gotten phenomenal feedback and guidance that has made me better and has helped me navigate through these situations.
Or even if you start talking it out and all of a sudden, as you talk it out loud, the answers start to come to maybe you and your leader. And you mentioned something, Carson, that really spoke to me. A phrase that has helped me through the years is just saying to someone, "Help me understand why," or "Help me understand the situation that led up to X, Y, and Z." So it just totally takes the situation out of being a defensive situation where they can actually explain to you. And maybe then when they do explain it to you, then it takes it out of any repercussions or any defensiveness. Or then you can say, well, let me tell you what I would have done. But I do know this. I have learned, and we were talking about this earlier, I have learned now in my career that my success really is going to be based ultimately on how many uncomfortable conversations or successful uncomfortable conversations I'm willing to have. That's really how I get my utility belt in the Batman world built up, because those uncomfortable conversations make me successful as a leader, and it builds me up and it builds my superpower. So have those uncomfortable conversations. Don't put them off.
It's a muscle. That's the mic drop moment. Phenomenal. Richard, always good to see you, my friend. What I love about you is you tackle all the tough conversations, all the tough discussions that I think make us all better as leaders, as sellers, as humans. So thank you, as always. Always good to see you.
I appreciate our conversations, Carson. Thanks for always being a friend and always leading. Man, I appreciate you.
Back at you. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, sir.